Everyone, and welcome. I'm Patrick Nelson from Speakers Associates, and I'm your host today. It's great to see you joining us. If you are watching live, hello. And if you're catching up with this on the recording afterwards, welcome as well. It's good to have you with us. Okay, so today we are talking about high performance, but in a very grounded way. So not as a buzzword, but as something that real organizations try to build, try to sustain in the real world, especially when things are busy, when they're complex, when they're moving fast, which I think is what we're all having right now. So I think one of the things we're going to see today is that performance isn't just about talent. It's about behavior. It's about the things that are done day to day, the habits, the rituals that repeat when the pressure's on. And that's exactly what today's session is about, high performance by design. So I'm very pleased to be joined by James Whittle and Tom Caulfield, aka the Tempest 2, founders of Tempest Experience. So over the last decade or so, Tom and James have worked with organizations such as Airbnb, JP Morgan, BNY, Amazon, and what they've been doing is helping leaders think about and understand what really drives performance at scale, the behaviors that matter, the rituals that stick, the leadership principles that turn strategy into action. So sit back with me, enjoy, listen to what Tom and James have to say. I believe you're going to get tremendous value from this session today. If you have questions, please pop into the comments as they occur to you and as we go along. And then at the end of the session, we've got 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A, and we'll answer as many of those questions as possible. A couple of quick notes before we start. If you can't stay for the whole thing, the recording will be available afterwards. And if you're watching on catch up, still feel free to add those comments. If you have further questions, we'll be passing them on to James and Tom, and I'm sure they'll answer those questions for you. So, Tom, James, thank you both for being here, and over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Patrick. No, it's a pleasure to be here. So I'm James, and this is Tom, wherever he is for you. And we are the Tempest 2. And as Patrick said, we are, for 10 years, have been doing two things. On one hand, working with incredible organizations around the world to help them build and develop a mindset and a culture for high performance, for getting things done, whether that be through tough times, through scaling times. And it's been a wild journey. But on the other hand, we have a bit of a unique lens. We've been professional adventurers for the last 10 years. And before you say it, yeah, that is completely ridiculous, but it's what gives us a different perspective on performance. We have the unique combination of having worked inside everything from exec teams all the way down at some of the most ambitious companies in the world. And we are able to pair that with our own personal experience, where we literally apply the same frameworks and principles that we talk about in organizations directly to adventures. And we are professional adventurers in the least traditional sense, meaning that we've got zero background in any of the challenges that we're facing. So whether it's crossing oceans, climbing mountains, it all starts from absolute scratch. And it's really about applying these principles to go from zero to high performance, to show that achieving that level is not only repeatable, but sustainable as well.
So yeah, obviously, as James said, the two things we've done over the last 10 years really is to work with some of the best organizations in the world, as you can see here, but also continue to push ourselves in the world of adventure. And to go back to the very start of our story was 10 years ago, where we found ourselves in East London in a pub called the Dickens Inn, where I was attending an event. Sorry, 1 second. This echo is doing my absolute nutting. Tech difficulties, guys. 1 second. Anyway, so yeah, to go back to the start of our journey was 10 years ago, when a series of drunken text messages genuinely changed the course of our lives. I was at an event called the Clipper World Yacht Race. I was watching my mum take on her own adventure, taking part in the incredible race from London all the way to Rio. And I had this epiphany. I was stood at the bar on my own. I'd had a couple of drinks, and I looked over at my mum with her team, huge celebrations, amazing achievement. And this profound kind of moment hit me, and I suddenly thought, oh my God, my mum is more of a badass than I am. So I jumped on Google, searched biggest adventures in the world, and on page 2 somewhere, after Everest, North Pole, South Pole's ocean rowing. And I thought to myself, right, if my mum is going to sail the Atlantic, then I'm going to try and row it. And these are the text messages that I sent James then and there. He was at a birthday party about 100 miles away. He'd had a couple of drinks too. And this huge life-changing decision was signed off with a bunch of emojis. And then you fast forward 18 months. The biggest obstacle that James and I had when taking on an Atlantic row was that neither of us had ever been in a rowing boat. We had never sailed. And we are about half the height of a normal rower. But fast forward 18 months, we've raised about £100,000 in sponsorship money just to get the boat in the water. We've done all the training that we could. We found ourselves in Gran Canaria with 3,000 miles ahead of us. And we kind of ping-ponged out of this harbor. It took us about an hour to get out because we hadn't really figured out how to steer the boat yet. And we turned right, and we knew that 3,000 miles ahead of us was Barbados. That was our kind of end location. And we had spoken about it. We dreamt about it. We'd worked so hard to make this a reality. And now it was up to us to get going and essentially make it to the other side. And it became really evident, from day one, that we had bitten off probably more than we could chew. We were really struggling with the routine of 2 hours on, 2 hours off. We were petrified of the night. And soon enough, we realized that rowing an ocean was less about physical endeavor and really more about overcoming obstacle after obstacle after obstacle. And the Atlantic threw pretty much everything you can imagine at us. We had a nighttime capsize. We were inches away from being hit by a tanker. One moment that we really wanted to touch on today, because it was a real kind of seminal moment in the last 10 years for us, came through something that we were never expecting.
Yeah, so to bring a bit of colour to this story, this is an image of our tracker across the Atlantic. And we had land support that we turned to for some troubleshooting, general advice, and mainly weather forecasting. I still love the fact that the land support got the weather forecast wrong for us 100% of the time. So what started as being really frustrating just ended up being quite funny with how wrong they were. And this is a fine example of that. So we spoke to land support. They told us about this system relatively near us in the Atlantic. Nothing to worry about, but if we heard of it, it was all good. We were aware. 2 days later, we spoke to them again. Right, the system's getting a bit closer to us, but nothing to worry about. It might suck up some of our winds and waves. Rowing might be tough for a couple of days, but after that, we should have champagne weather all the way into Barbados. And that was their words verbatim. And then 2 days after that, this happened.
Let's take a look out in the tropics, and I'll show you what's going on. We've got a hurricane in the tropics during the month of January. There have only been 4 named storms since we've been keeping records during the month of January. Some of the computer models have it coming pretty close to a Category 2 hurricane.
Yeah, it's a fantastic example of that forecasting. And this is that same tracker zoomed in. So every blue dot you can see is the GPS sent from our boat every 6 hours. So as you can see, it's all going relatively well until it wasn't. And I think, hopefully this resonates with you, this section, but it's very simple, really, rowing the Atlantic. It's not easy, but it's simple. It's getting from point A to point B. And that thing just drove our thoughts, motivated us every moment of every day. We ate to row, we slept to row. And now, not only could we not make progress towards that goal, but we got pushed back over 100 miles over the course of 3 days. And we really, really struggled with it. I think a lot of you will have experienced that inside your organizations, that things outside of your control are stopping you reaching your goal. And in the Atlantic, it's very black and white. There's nothing we can do about it. And it took us having a very stern conversation with ourselves to realize that we can only control what we can control, and we've got to let everything else go. And the best teams that we work with around the world are very good at doing that exact thing. They don't not experience setbacks, or they don't not face challenges, but when they do, they face it with optimism.
Yeah, and I think we took the news of this hurricane really badly. We whinged and whined about it, and as James said, had a pretty firm conversation. And we were about halfway across at this point, and we were still really struggling to get into really the rhythm of rowing an ocean. We weren't sleeping well, we weren't eating right, and suddenly we had this opportunity now, this 3 days in the cabin during this hurricane to rest and recuperate. And at some point in those 3 days, we can't quite pinpoint when, but it was like someone had flicked a switch. And we came out of that storm genuinely two different people on that boat. We went from really struggling to actually thriving. And when we look back at those 54 days we had at sea, whether it's a capsize, whether it's a hurricane, whether it's the issue with the tanker, the weather, whatever it is, all those setbacks at the time, we would have done anything to avoid them. All we wanted to do is nice, smooth rowing all the way to Barbados. And we speak to other people that have done an ocean row, and some of them have been lucky enough to have that. But when we look back in hindsight, the greatest kind of things that we drew from this adventure came from those incredibly hard times. And this is really a trend that we've seen over the last decade, both in our adventures and our own business, but also with our clients. And really, what we're seeing now is senior leaders in the people teams, whether that's a CHRO, a head of talent management, or whatever, really it is their responsibility and your responsibility as a leader to try and create an environment that puts your people under pressure, that allows them to do hard things. And we have worked with some of the best startups in the world, some of which, in identical verticals, some of which have had to do 5 pivots, had to do layoffs, they've run out of money, they've had to raise again, they've gone through really, really tough times. And they've got a competitor who maybe in San Francisco raised a huge seed round or Series A. They've got the shiny offices. They never really have had that moment where they've had their backs against the wall. And if you compare those two cultures, it's night and day. The ones that have gone through hard stuff together, the culture is so rock solid. Everyone has each other's backs. They've been through the tough times. They've built this like resilience muscle. And for us, we really try and get our clients to try and, not make people's lives easier. A lot of leaders think that their job is to make work easier, but it really isn't. It's to try and make people more capable, and you have to challenge them in doing that. You have to add to their workload. If they have a weak spot, you need to try and push them to make themselves better there. And it really is kind of a trend that we've seen on and on and on. The best leaders make their people do hard things, because that really is, from our experience, how you grow this growth mindset.
Yeah, so the second half of the row for us was completely different. And I think, on Tom's point, really going through that hard moment is why. That was where the switch flicked, and we, chose to embrace the challenge, and it made the whole thing more enjoyable, and it made us far more capable. So after 54 days of not seeing anything, on the morning of the 54th, we saw Barbados. And as cliche as it sounds, it was, only at that point did we believe that we were actually going to do it. We were actually going to make our way across the Atlantic. So it was a pretty special moment, to say the least. And the last 6 hours down the west coast of Barbados are where sort of all these dreams and all these thoughts that, this might actually happen started to come to fruition. And we knew that our friends and family were kind of waiting for us to celebrate. It was pretty special.
So after coming round the wall in Port St. Charles, we could see our friends and family on the jetty. Our mums were there with champagne. And if you actually look at this photo closely, you'll notice that I'm soaking wet. And essentially, James and I had rowed 3,000 miles. We've been at sea for 54 days. Every single time you're rowing on your own at night, you're thinking about this moment. And we came round this corner and we could see the yacht club. And we cut this corner a bit fine, because behind us, that big wall is a massive super yacht, and it's got these angular anchor chains, and we cut the corner quite fine, and we'd ended up rowing 3,000 miles, and our rudder got snagged on an anchor chain 7 meters from the finish line. So this took about 20 minutes for me to untangle it. Everyone had gone back to their lunch. It was the most embarrassing kind of arrival you could think of. But eventually we touched land, stepped off the boat, and the sense of relief is hard to put into words. And you can probably see from this image of us, the physical changes when we touched land in Barbados were obvious. We had the weight loss, we had the tans, we had the beards, but really when we stepped foot off that boat, something had genuinely changed within us. And you could probably tell by now that in the world of adventure, most individuals are pretty elite. James and I are the antithesis of that. We are genuinely just two ordinary guys that took a bit of a risk, We were told by 101 people that we couldn't do this. It was stupid, naive. We were arrogant, foolish. And when we touched land, we actually realized what we were capable of. And we came back to London after spending a week in Barbados. We completed the bar menu, the cocktail menu, came back to our jobs and started having conversations with our friends and our colleagues. And we were getting asked the same questions. You know, what was your favorite moment? What did you learn about yourself on the waves? And we were kind of trying to answer these questions. And we sat down a week later after getting back. And after reflecting on it, you know, when we touched land, essentially, yes, we'd realized what we were capable of, but we boiled it down to something even more simple than that. And that is when we completed this row, we essentially removed the word can't from our vocabulary. We genuinely think that that is the most toxic word in the English language. Anyone watching this, both personally and professionally, you'll be in a situation, it might be a leadership meeting. As soon as someone says that word, we can't do that, we haven't got the budget. We can't do that, timeframes are too short, they'll never sign it off. As soon as that word is dropped, it kills any innovation, any progress, any creativity. So we really try and get our clients objectively to look at that and remove it from the day-to-day conversations. And that is what we've done for the last decade. And it really is the ethos that the whole of the Tempest 2 is built upon.
Yeah, so what does it mean for us then to remove the word can't? Once we've arrived in Barbados or we're in London having that discussion, if we live and breathe it, it meant that we left our jobs with zero savings in the bank. We would become professional adventurers, which is still laughable. And, you know, much to the dismay of our now wives, we would become professional adventurers. But when we embrace and embody that attitude, it's kind of, you know, why not do that? So whether it is breaking records in an ultra endurance triathlon in Patagonia, riding through the Sahara Desert on motorbikes, you know, we were learning so much about what it takes to keep going through the process of becoming a high performer, that the same things were starting to stick. And it wasn't really until our more recent adventure where, you know, we really would test the ethos and the frameworks of the Tempest 2 to a completely another level.
So the story of our next adventure is a genuine case study in growth mindset, because this was the background on my MacBook when we rode the Atlantic. And during those 3 days in that hurricane where we were stuck in the cabin, James and I decided then and there, when we get back to London, we're going to leave our jobs and take the Tempest 2 full time. We're going to become professional adventurers. And we are writing down, what's the next big challenge? Do we do one of the poles? Do we go to the Amazon? Do we tackle Everest? And as a complete joke, James pointed at the background and said, imagine climbing El Capitan. I'd never heard of El Capitan. Neither of us had ever rock climbed in our lives. And it was a complete joke. We laughed at it and we never thought about it again. Until 4 years later, we found ourselves in Yosemite Valley in California, staring up at El Cap, the most famous wall of granite on the planet, 3,000-foot vertical face, made really famous, obviously, in the last few years by Alex Honnold, who climbed it without any ropes, which, by the way, is absolutely insane. Now we know more about climbing. And as James said, this was really, for us, a huge test in trying to push ourselves with this high performance mindset to learn a very new sport with a lot of complexity in 18 months, having never climbed before, to scaling El Cap, 18 months later. And it was a challenge like we'd never faced before.
Yeah, typically when it came to our adventures, it was really an exercise in being able to get outside of our comfort zone and embrace discomfort and have a lot of grit, and that would really see us through. But the difference with climbing is that it's just a whole nother level of skill and knowledge that you need to have even to get off the ground, you know. And really, it was never going to be a sheer excellent climbing display, us getting to the top of El Cap. But even the fact of keeping each other safe is incredibly complex when it comes to climbing. So our previous evidence and experience of just getting uncomfortable, which we were massive believers in, was kind of being challenged. And it was in the lead up to climbing El Cap that we spoke with the best female big wall climber in the UK, a lady called Hazel Finley, who kind of gave us a bit of an understanding as to what was going on. As when we were getting outside of our comfort zone and learning how to climb, we were missing the mark, and we were finding that we were coming back from climbing trips not only had we not made any progress, but we were actually worse and more scared, and our performance had been affected so much because we were doing something wrong. And that really boils down to this framework and this illustration here, which you may have seen before. And as I'm thinking it, I think it'd be worthwhile you guys thinking about either where you see your daily tasks on this illustration, or probably more poignantly, something that you do now on a regular basis that at one point would have been in your panic zone, because there definitely will be something there. And you'll hear a lot of people tell you, you just got to get outside your comfort zone. You know, we've said it, we've shared the power of it. And the problem with that is too many people land in this thing called the panic zone. So as you can see here is this kind of outer ring. And the panic zone is actually detrimental both to your performance, but also to your learning and your development. So we kind of want to avoid that. And what had happened with us with climbing is we jumped straight into the panic zone, and it was filling us with fear and dread. And you can probably think of things in your career that do exactly the same. You know, the classic example is public speaking, still the number one fear worldwide. But imagine if you got picked up now, you're currently in your comfort zone as you're watching this, I'd imagine. Imagine if we picked you up and we put you in front of an audience of 1,000 people, and you had to share something that you were incredibly knowledgeable about, but you had to talk about it in front of 1,000 people. You would likely stumble, fumble over your words, and it wouldn't be your lack of ability. It would be the fear and the panic taking over. And that's exactly what was happening with us as we were thinking about climbing LCAP. Now, the sweet spot to personal development really is this growth, and the sweet spot to high performance company is this growth zone. It's the right level of challenge that you sit in consistently. And when you spend time in this growth zone, you feel engaged, you're energized. But when you spend time in the panic zone, the kind of opposite is true, and you're exhausted. And that was ultimately the case for us on LCAP.
Yeah, so after spending a month in the valley, waking up every morning and pushing ourselves well into our panic zone, the day came to actually take on the climb. And our method was simple. We were going to spend 3 nights vertical. We were going to take it on, bit by bit. And we started on day 1 really early to try and get up to our first camp at about lunchtime. And we were climbing really slowly. We were really nervous. And our arrival time got pushed back from midday to 2 p.m., 2 till 4, until eventually we stumbled onto this ledge at about 3 a.m. the following morning. We were absolutely broken. And there were 2 climbers asleep on this ledge. And we woke up in the morning and we were treated to 2 relatively famous faces in Alex Honnold, the guy that climbed it without any ropes in free solo, and a climber called Tommy Caldwell, who's done the hardest ever climb on LCAP. So you had this amazing kind of spectrum of ability on this single bed sized piece of rock 1,000 feet off the ground. On one side, you had the 2 greatest climbers in this sport's history, and only a few meters away, easily the 2 worst climbers to ever even look at El Capitan. But talking about high performance, this was literally the biggest personification of high performance we've ever seen. Watching these 2 guys operate in this environment was one of the most inspiring things we've witnessed. And we were super nervous about day 2. We had a huge vertical gain to do. There were some big features on it that we were really unsure about. And when we were speaking to people in the climbing gyms in London when we were training, even the best climbers in those gyms would be telling us, there is no way you're going to make it up El Capitan. There is literally no chance. And it was full of negativity because they couldn't see themselves climbing it and they were better than us, therefore we couldn't. But when we were speaking to these guys, we were like, what do you think we should do here? Or are we going to make it to the top, really being honest? And they were so pragmatic in their response. They were just like, yeah, of course you'll make it to the top. You just got to do these 3 things well. You've got to look out for each other and eventually you'll get there. And this is something we have seen time and time and time again in the world of adventure. When you seek out the advice from the best people in the world, they don't doubt that you can do it. And it's such an amazing reminder of when, as a leader, or if you're hiring leaders or taking advice from someone, only take advice from the people that have been there and done it. Don't listen to the people on LinkedIn who are spouting about it every day, and just focus on the people that you respect and have done it and take that advice on board. And that really is one of the biggest secrets to our success in adventure. But these guys climbed off. They were doing the hardest ever world first route. We watched them for about half an hour because we were scared to start day 2. But it started with a game of rock, paper, scissors. If there's any death-defying feat that we have to take on in an adventure, James and I are quite diplomatic. We do rock, paper, scissors to see who will risk their lives. Up until this point, I think I'd lost every single one. But luckily, I won this one. James lost, and he had to go and do this.
Hopefully you don't have motion sickness watching that. That is a really famous feature on the nose of El Cap called the king swing. So the way we make progress up the nose is basically through a series of weaknesses in the rocks or a series of cracks. And you have to do the king swing because one crack system runs out, so you have to make your way to the other to carry on making vertical progress. So Tommy climbed ahead, fixed the rope, of which I'm on the other end of, sprinting to get to the next crack system. And it is the ultimate test of trust because nothing that is in my control, I have no input on the safety of that system. So I have to completely trust Tom's knot tying ability, which I won't lie is quite difficult to do. But it was really a really interesting unlock because the moment I was able to completely relinquish control and trust Tom, firstly, I was able to make my way across and then bring him over. But the knock-on effect that had for the rest of the climb was massive. Whereas, Tom said on day 1, we were climbing really within ourselves. We were in the panic zone. It was a classic representation of that. And although this moment was incredibly frightening and high adrenaline, the fact that we had to completely trust each other was the difference then on days 2 and 3 that made us able to kind of work better as a team. And it's the same thing that we see inside organizations all the time, is that your best leaders, you can't control absolutely everything as much as you want to. The moment you're able to relinquish and trust your teammates and those around you, like you go far faster, far further. So it was quite a nice reminder of that and a very obvious illustration. And day 2 was massive for us. I think we had 1,000 feet of vertical gain, and we got stuck straight in. We were working well for us, communicating effectively. The exposure beneath our feet was just ever growing, and we were kind of in the zone. We weren't eating, we weren't drinking much, and then all of a sudden the massive exposure beneath our feet just got replaced with complete darkness and just this dinner plate sized beam of light that represented like whatever it is we were focusing on from our head torch. And we kind of done it again. We got into the early hours, and it took Tom asking me what time it was to snap us out of it. At which point it was 4 a.m. We were still a couple of hundred feet below our objective of Camp 6. And we needed to find somewhere pretty quickly to bed down before things got dangerous.
So this is where we managed to find a ledge. I think we're the first people to ever sleep on this ledge on El Capitan. It's not where you're meant to sleep. And we spent the night with our feet dangling over this cliff, 2,000 feet off the floor. And what's so fascinating about this is, even watching those videos and looking at this image, my hands are dripping in sweat, even though that's actually me sat there. And it's such an interesting kind of phenomenon because it's so cliche to say, but so many people say that your mind is like a muscle. And we've always said, as James said earlier, that getting outside your comfort zone, it builds your mindset, it makes you more resilient, it makes you a high performer. But really, there's never been any evidence physiologically that backs that up. And amazingly, about 18 months ago, we were sent a study by an ex-client of ours that has now become a little bit more kind of popularized. Andrew Huberman spoke through it on his podcast. And it really is around this part of the brain called the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, the AMCC. And what is so staggering about this part of the brain, which is responsible for our response to physical and emotional stress. When we are stressed, when we're in fight or flight, this is the part of the brain that lights up. And up until this point, there was very little known about it. But essentially, what they figured out in this study is that you can grow the AMCC. People that have a large AMCC have high motivation, they have high willpower, tenacity, and grit. A lot of elite athletes have a large anterior mid-cingulate cortex. And those with the smaller one often struggle with mental health issues, a lack of motivation. They maybe, struggle to get out of bed in the morning or follow a diet or get fit and strong. And usually we thought that if you have a small one, it's kind of set. And if you have a big AMCC, then it benefits you. But what they found out is that much like a muscle, we can actually affect and grow this part of our brain. And the way we do that is fascinating. And it is in two parts. Firstly, we have to do something that's challenging. And then the second part is we have to do something challenging that we do not want to do. And that second part of that equation is the thing that kind of has made it, as Andrew Huberman said, the biggest discovery in neuroscience in 100 years. And for us, our kind of jaws hit the floor because it made so much sense. When we're training for an adventure, when we're pushing ourselves constantly, when we're in the Peak District, trying to train for the climb, and we're scared and we're nervous, this part of our brain is growing and we're becoming more motivated, more resilient. And then when we come back to our cushy lives and go and speak on the stage, and we spend a year just doing our corporate stuff, it begins to shrink again, because like any muscle in the gym, to make it grow, you have to stress it, you have to increase the weight, the reps. And essentially this is so relevant for both in your personal life but professionally, that when people are doing hard stuff, when times are tough at work, when you're going through transitions, when people are worried about AI and their roles, going through hard things is building resilience, not just kind of on the surface level, but it is literally changing their physiology. They are becoming stronger mentally. Their AMCC is growing over time. And it really kind of is a huge light bulb moment just for us, because it finally has some science behind this message that we're so keen for people to understand. But it really allows you guys as leaders to pass that message on to people to say, yes, what we're going through is really rough. Yes, I'm pushing you to do hard things, but this is why. And it kind of overlaps into their personal lives as well, becoming more motivated and, just better all round. And the final day of LCAP for us, we'd done the bulk of it. We eventually got up to the top. We were hoping to get there for sunset. But unfortunately, we again were about 9 hours late, got up there about 2 a.m. the following morning. But really for us, LCAP was this incredible moment where we managed to pair, yes, the grit and determination, but also with really high performing learning. We learned so much about skill acquisition and how to kind of frame that. And really, we're hoping that these stories have just given you guys a really nice foundation for this conversation around high performance, because for us, it is so crucial for people to understand that high performance is a skill. It can be learned, it can be developed. And we have shown that over time by taking on big adventures in different disciplines, starting from complete novice to being high performers in a short period of time, that is essentially possible. So thank you so much for listening to our story. Hopefully that's given you context as to what we do, what we're about, what we've achieved. And if there's any questions that you guys have sent in before or coming in live, we'd be happy to host them now.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Tom. There were several points during that when I was watching the videos and the photos. I think I was in my own personal panic zone. I represent you guys, and I think it drove home some of the crazy things that you do to an outsider, what seems to be rather crazy. So thanks, you've given me an evening to remember, even though we're doing this remotely. I think it was you, Tom, that first spoke about doing hard things. How do leaders distinguish between that productive discomfort that builds capability and pushing people too far in a way that undermines their performance, their confidence?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, and the way we try and coach leaders on this is James talked through those growth zones, so from comfort to growth to panic. And really, if you're managing a team of 20, 30, 40 people, it's really your responsibility as a leader to spend time with each person to really understand what sits where on that framework. Because for some people, what might be in their panic zone will be someone else's comfort zone. So it's very hard to roll out something that is effective in kind of growing that mindset and creating high performers. It has to be quite an individual approach, because as a leader, if you then figure out, okay, Susan in my team this is her panic zone. This is how we're going to work, pushing her slightly further and further into that growth zone and bringing that from panic to growth, growth to comfort, and then starting again. So I wish there was a way that you could just roll it out across a 10,000 person organization, but it doesn't work like that. And I think we've seen it time and time again where we get brought in to deliver a keynote to some leaders. We maybe run a few workshops and they go, well, yeah, can we just run a workshop on becoming resilient? And it's like, yeah, we can run a workshop on becoming resilient, but no one is going to be more resilient at the end of that. This is a 6, 12, 18, 24 month thing where you have to commit to constantly pushing that. But when people understand it, the amazing thing about the AMCC, which I close on, when people begin to understand that, okay, doing something I don't want to do, whether it's, it could be budgeting, it could be taking the bins out in the rain, it could be running a 5K when you hate running. When you unlock that understanding that this is actually growing a part of your brain that is incredibly good for you, there's almost a bit of that switch moment. People are like, okay, I will do that because I know it's good for me. It's like when you eat healthy food, you maybe don't want to, but you know it's good for you. So it's really just about educating people on that growth. But yeah, that's how kind of we've seen the best clients we work with approach that. It's a very individualistic kind of method.
Excellent. Thank you. That's a really, really good distinction. Thank you for that, Tom. James, that video that you put on, I did get a little bit of motion sickness watching that. So I'm guessing El Capitan isn't for me. But what a moment to meet Alex Honnold on a ledge, and you didn't know it was him until the morning. Is that right?
Yeah, unfortunately for them, we actually woke them up before we arrived onto the ledge because we were swearing our way up the last 2 hours of the rock face, having been on there for so long that they just gave us a courteous hello as we got there, and then they didn't make formal introductions until we woke up the next morning. We were actually woken up by a base jumper who jumped off the summit, and the parachute kind of ripping open had made the difference. But yeah, no, we didn't know he was going to be there. It was a very pleasant surprise. So we should have been up at the crack of dawn and cracking on with it, and we would have got to Camp 6. But really, what the Tempest is about is like the journey along the way. So we were never gonna be the first to leave that ledge. We were going to speak to this one of the most unique, incredible athletes ever, and we were going to try and keep him chatting for as long as possible. So it was one of the better conversations of our career, like hands down.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the point as well that with leaders, you take advice from the people that you respect and that you, as you say, have been there and done it. I think it's also everybody is surrounded, aren't they, by well-meaning advice as well. That people don't mean you harm with the things that they tell you, but the risk. What would you say is the risk of listening to too many voices, and particularly from people who haven't gone the path that you're going?
I think it can change your motivation unless you're really set on what you're doing and where you're going. You look for advice because you don't know something, so you want to inevitably trust that advice. And if you get mixed messaging or you go to the wrong people, and you're right, people are giving us advice from the best intentions. They're probably telling us we can't do it, almost looking out for our safety. But it can just dilute your thinking. And at that level or that tier, everyone's got a different idea of what right is and what the best way is. So the way that we kind of cut through that is to try and go straight to the very top. We were lucky enough in ocean rowing that it's a very small group of people that had done that before. So finding those people was, quite easy. But even then, I think back to those conversations that we had with people before, and we got all sorts of advice. Our experience was completely different to all of those people's. So I think that, the best advice is to take advice, but with a grain of salt, which, I think is, you can't have an ego. So we go there and we look for opportunities to learn, and you take on board what works and you try and dismiss what doesn't. And the more you speak to experts, the more people you speak to, the clearer your picture gets.
I think it's also a great point in terms of if people took advice from those a bit more experienced than them and a bit older than them, then Nike, Apple, Airbnb, these companies would never exist, because
Sure.
every single one of those companies was told that will never work. No one
Yeah.
wants to sleep in someone else's bedroom. Like Reebok have got the market share, Apple, Microsoft, the HP, they're too big. And for us, if we took the advice of people over the years, we would have never done an adventure. Even our B2B stuff, we, at the very start of our career, we sat down with a well-respected speaker bureau and they said, there's 2 of you, no one will ever book you. If we'd taken that advice, we wouldn't be here today. So I think advice is great for gathering information, but the decision should never be made by just the advice of other people. You need to make it yourself and like do the weights and balances essentially.
Yeah, and choose the advice, as James says, choose the advice that you're going to actually take on board.
Exactly.
You were talking about the free zones when you had the concentric circles on the screen. I found a distinction between the growth zone and the panic zone to be really helpful. For someone who's leading a team, what do you think are the signals that tell you that individuals or that your team on the whole has crossed from that either that comfort zone or that healthy growth zone into that panic? What does that performance look like on the surface?
I think it obviously varies depending on what they're doing, but I think the obvious ones are they then try and avoid doing it again. So if you see someone go into the panic zone with, let's use public speaking as the example, right? So you've got a middle manager who you're trying to kind of develop to become better at speaking in front of key clients. If you throw them in front of your biggest client on day one, and they underperform, or even if they perform, but naturally they're in the panic zone, they will try and, make excuses to not do that again. They will try and kind of move away from being in that experience again. Whereas if you're trying to take them from the comfort zone to the growth zone, it should be challenging them. There should be some pushback, but they really should be seeing the growth to be like, actually, that wasn't too bad. Like maybe I'll give that another go. So really it is the nuances. Resistance, you want there to be a little bit, but not enough that they're then trying to, essentially make excuses to never do that thing again. And the climbing example for us, it's an amazing kind of example because we have never climbed since LCAP. So we spent 18 months becoming good climbers in the hope that, this will be something we do for the rest of our lives. But we were so panicked. We have been in the panic zone for such an extended period of time that we literally resent the thought of climbing now. It's kind of that black and white. We left our climbing kit in Yosemite. It's still there. We gave it to someone. So that really does show that the power of it. You want people to come back for more and push themselves, but not far enough that they resent it.
So James, what do you think would make you overcome that and get back out onto another peak like El Capitan?
I think it's almost starting from scratch, and that tends to be what happens if people find themselves in the panic zone. Is you need to go back to the beginning, and when I kind of pose the question to people earlier, think of something in your panic zone, whether it's public speaking, it's really the world of self-growth, personal development is just moving things that currently sit in that panic zone down into your comfort zone, and we see it all the time in organizations, but the way you do that is utilizing the growth zone. So it's let's take out speaking in front of 100 people. The growth zone version of that might be speaking to 5 of your peers that you're a bit more comfortable with. Still feels challenging. Now, it's quite a nice way to look at it. It's similar to the AMCC stuff. It's almost something that I don't really want to do, but when I look back on it, I'm glad I've done it, and I have that sense of I've got energy from doing that. I'm really glad I did that. And a lot of the time at work, it can be that awkward conversation as well. It might be having that awkward conversation that you've been putting off, or sharing that idea, having a bit of bravery to share that idea. That's all stuff that really is in your growth zone. And the way you get into to do that thing for us to climb LCAP again is just through incremental, increased exposure consistently to that growth zone that makes it get closer and closer and feel doable.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you both. The challenges that you've overcome that you shared with us have been obviously fantastic. You both alluded to and mentioned the fact that public speaking has also been one of those as well. And I know the fantastic career and the business that you guys have built doing that. What what's the achievement that stands out for you when it comes to the organizations that you've helped and the things that you've helped leaders and teams to achieve?
Yeah, it's a really good one. We were actually thinking about this recently because obviously we've been fortunate enough to work with all the biggest, shiniest logos in the world, from big banks to big tech and everything in between. And they're obviously the ones that are on the website because everyone recognizes them and, you know, reveres them. But honestly, some of the biggest impacts we've had have been with startups, you know, at the start of their journey. We've done some stuff with Scale AI last year, you know, gone through this absolutely insane period of kind of disruption and growth and the acquisition from Meta, and really trying to impact their journey and put frameworks in place. But we were actually in Zanzibar a couple of weeks ago with a Canadian energy startup that are trying to power the continent of Africa in rural areas. And their team, you know, it is the most complicated, difficult business we've ever seen. You know, we go and speak to a tech company and their problems are, oh, our click-through rate is dropped 3% in the last year, or, you know, people aren't happy with the stock options. Their problems are their team are being kidnapped by a local tribe and they're being held ransom, or, you know, just stuff that is just beyond even our own kind of realm of reality. And working with them, we worked with them a year ago. We went out to Tanzania, worked with them, put a load of stuff in place around the panic zones, especially. And then we worked with them again this year. And the difference in that group of people, you know, not all down to us, obviously, but the way that the language they're using, that they're still from when we worked with them a year ago, it was an amazing moment to actually see a company really take hold of the things that we worked on as a group, and the difference it's made in that business is astronomical. So yeah, it's not always the big fancy companies that bring us the most kind of pride and joy. It's often the ones where the impact is really visible, because let's be honest, JP Morgan are going to be okay if they don't work with us. So yeah, it's definitely the smaller ones where we take most pride.
Yeah, it's not this, the click-through rate isn't like it's been fantastic listening to you guys for this, and obviously I've got the privilege of working with you both as well. I do think that one of the biggest challenges you've overcome, from what I've seen from getting to know you, is public speaking. I remember there was a book written back in I'm sure it was in the 1990s, maybe the early 2000s. It was by Andy Lapata and I think it's Peter Roper. And the title of the book is "And Death Came Third." And the title refers to a statistic that says, you know, the things that people fear the most, death's number 3. I can't actually remember what number 2 was, but speaking's up there at number 1. And working in the industry, obviously, that I work in, I found that quite an amusing and surprising statistic, because I'm surrounded all day, every day by people who deal with the very fear that you're talking about. But the fact that you can take the strategies and the tools and the tactics that you've learned from being, as you say, two very ordinary, I would say, two down-to-earth and fabulously fun people to be with, to being professional adventurers and overcoming some of the most remarkable challenges available on the planet, it is nothing short of astounding. So thank you very much, James and Tom, for your time this evening.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
If there are other questions, or if you'd like to get in touch with James and Tom and talk about how to book them from one of your events, please follow the details at the bottom of the page that you're on right now, or the page where you'll see this video, and we'll be happy to talk to you about how you can arrange to have Tom and James run an event at your organization. Once again, thank you both. We really appreciate it.
Take care.
Thank you.